North Carolina Central came out the gate ready to dominate in their first round playoff matchup against Richmond, but we'll look at the turning point where everything began to crumble and led to the Eagles getting blown out. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. And we'll be looking at the Bayou Classic at the end of the show, specifically Grambling in the three situations that didn't go in their favor, and that's the reason they lost this game. But it's really on them more so than anything else, in my opinion. Before that, we'll look at Southern because they made an interesting switch at the start of the Bayou Classic, and something that, to me at least, is another indictment on Eric Dooley. I know he's gone. We're not going to beat a dead horse or kick somebody when they're down, but I do think that this is an example of something that was pretty bad out there prior to that. And we kick it off with North Carolina Central because North Carolina Central looked like they were ready to run through Richmond. You know, and I know a lot of us felt like, okay, well, Central can definitely win this game. And I think they could have. But boy, when you look at the outcome, it looked like there was a significant gap. And it didn't feel like that to start. But we'll look at it's specific to me, but I can't understand why everything changed at this point. Davius Richard's injury. That was the turning point of the game. Now, I didn't want to say that because it almost sounds like an excuse. And it's not. Like, there was a lot of things that went wrong for them offensively that didn't have to do with Davius Richard being hurt. And there was a lot of things that went wrong with them defensively. Like, Davius Richard don't even play that side of the ball. But his injury, for some reason, felt like the clear-cut turning point in the game, right? Because you look at North Carolina Central, the way that they came out, yes, Richmond was able to get an explosive play early, and they were able to score fast. But after that, everything was stalled out. You look at the North Carolina Central offense. They were able to get some movement. By the time that actually Davius Richard got hurt on a touchdown run and where he got hit going into the end zone, right? And that play turned it to 20-7. From the moment Davius Richard scored that play and he was hurt, you could see him shaking his hand like something was wrong, right? Shaking his hand and like, no, I'm not okay. Not shaking his hand as if something was wrong with his hand. But they were trying to celebrate, and you could just tell he was shaking his head and hand like, nah, something's up. After that play, where they went to 20-7, they were then outscored 42-7. The final score was 49-27. So from the moment that Davius Richard was injured, the Richmond Spiders went on a 42-7 run. Now, granted, you can't put all of that on Davius Richard. I think that there was a lot of issues that happened in the game that weren't Davius Richard related. But his injury, that point right there, was when everything changed. What do you want to say? It was that touchdown. He happened to get injured on that point. Like, whatever you want to say, the touchdown that made it 20-7 was the turning point in the game. because from there, the offense was stagnant. Matter of fact, Walker Harris came in for a drive. Nothing got going in that drive, but then you had Davius Richard come back. And when Richard came back in the game, you could tell he was off. There was opportunities to run. I didn't feel like he was taking them. It just the way he played the game felt different, right? But when you look at that, you also got to look at Latrell Carr. You also got to look at Jamari Taylor. You got to look at other things. The offensive line didn't feel like they were, after a while, protecting as well. When you're looking in the run game, Richmond looked like they knew the play before it was called. That has nothing to do with Davius Richard getting hurt. One of the reasons I didn't want to speak on this is because it feels almost like not an apology, but an excuse. And it's not when I detail it. There was plays where Latrell Carr, I remember specifically, was running, I believe, a zone read or a stretch play to the right side. And their linebacker, Galloway, shot the gap. And it wasn't the first time I had seen him do it. I don't know what happened after that 20-7 mark, but the offense couldn't do anything. They seemed like they were figured out. They seemed like they were a step behind despite calling the plays themselves. It almost looked as if they were reacting instead of the defense. See, on offense, you have the benefit of knowing the play and being able to call it and run the play, and the defense has to react to you. But the way that Richmond's defense was moving so effortlessly to the ball every single time, especially on run plays, it just felt like they knew what the call was already. And then the verticality of the offense was gone. And some of that probably had to do with Richard's injury, but I'm just naming all of the things that went wrong. And Devin Smith was the only person who really played well, and he was the only person who got some offense going at any point after the injury. Let me tell you what North Carolina Central was able to do after that 20-7 mark, after that injury. When you look at them, they had all 3 and outs, 1 4 and out, in which, no, they didn't get a first down. They just got 3 plays, didn't get it, and then went for it on 4th down, and then got out there. Then they had a 2-play drive in which they threw an interception. All of those happened. I think there was 5 drives in total. 1 drive, they scored a touchdown. 1 drive, they got a first down. That's it. If it wasn't that touchdown drive, they did absolutely nothing in the game. After the 20-7 mark, the offense went off the wall. But okay, maybe you want to blame Richard's injury for all of those things. I don't know how you could, but maybe you wanted to. Now I look at the defense, and the defense was terrible from that point on. Let me read to you what they did prior to the injury. So this is Richmond's drives. Touchdown, punt, fumble, turnover on downs in which you gained 1 yard. It was a botched fake punt. That's how they ended up turning the ball over on downs. Like, this defense was great outside of that explosive play. Nothing could really go wrong for them. And then when the injury happened, everything went wrong. Now you're looking at field goal attempt. They did miss it, but they got into scoring position. Touchdown, punt, touchdown. Not to mention they also had a punt return touchdown on the way. Like, this was, and the punt return touchdown didn't even feel like it should have happened. It was like, oh, okay, everything's going wrong. And I can see everything going down the drain. When Central scored that touchdown, they made it 35-27. I said, oh, we could have something. And then they rattled back with touchdown. Meanwhile, Central couldn't do diddly squat offensively, to quote my guy, Jim Mora. This was a bad performance, and it's one that we're going to explore probably for the next day. And then I think I might try to look at Devin Smith's performance, because that was kind of the silver lining. So we'll probably look at the ramifications of this game either tomorrow or Wednesday. And then the day after we do that, we'll look at Devin Smith. But the defense couldn't stop anything after that. It was a crazy turning point. So whether you want to say it was coincidental, and I'm definitely not saying that it correlated, right? I'm not saying it's caused anything. I'm just saying that when Davius Richard got hurt on his touchdown, everything after there went negative for North Carolina Central. You cannot blame the injury for everything. I don't even know if you can blame the injury for the majority of the things. But for some reason, want to call it coincidence, whatever, when North Carolina Central scored that touchdown to make it 20-7, and when Davius Richard got hurt on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, everything went down. And that was undebatably the turning point of the game. Now, as we move forward, we'll look at the Bayou Classic, our game of the week. Southern, they made a big time change at quarterback, and I'll tell you why that change, though it wasn't intended to be, is an indictment on Eric Dooley, the former Southern head coach. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, and Game Time is the place for all of your last minute ticket deals. I'm about to get on Game Time in a little bit. Even though it's not last minute, I'm going to look up a couple of tickets for the Mavericks versus Timberwolves game that's halfway through December, because I know that there's no better price that I'm going to get than the one that I'm going to get on Game Time. Matter of fact, they feel so confident in that fact, and I feel so confident in that fact, that they're willing to pay you 110% on the difference if you're able to find a seat in the same row and same section as the one that you got from Game Time for a better price. You're not going to find it though. So go ahead and download the app, use the Game Time app, create an account, and if you're new to it, you'll get $20 off your first purchase when you use the code Locked On College. That is using the code Locked On College to get $20 off your first purchase on whatever you're talking about. Concerts, games, theater plays, comedy shows, or anything in between. Go to the Game Time app, the best place for last minute tickets. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. And remember, we have our 24-hour Locked On Sports Today podcast stream, the first of its kind. That's how we do it over here on the Locked On brand. You won't find this anywhere else. So even as I'm speaking, there is a show airing. When I'm done, you can go check out what they're airing. Before I come on next time, you can check out what they're airing. It doesn't matter. 3 a.m., 3 p.m., Locked On Sports Today is still rolling. Now let's look at this Bayou Classic, because to me, there was an interesting decision made by the Southern Jaguars. When I look at this game, I look at who the starting quarterback was, and it was Noah Bodden. And that's interesting because Bodden didn't start all year long. That's interesting because for the second year in a row, Southern made a quarterback change in their last game of the year, the most important game of the year. Last year, that was a SWAC championship. This year, it's the Bayou Classic. This year is a little bit different than last year. One, because a SWAC championship wasn't on the line. So I guess, depending on who you're looking at or who you're talking to, somebody might argue that the stakes are not the same level. Okay, whatever. But then the most important difference between this year and last year is when the quarterback was taken out. Because Bodden was just starting the game. Harold Blood never saw the light of day. But last year, when you had McCray, who was starting and had been starting all year, now Glennon McDaniel comes in a SWAC championship game after 2 throws and like 3 runs. It was very early in the game. It didn't take long for them to change quarterbacks. So here's the thing. Southern hasn't had quarterback controversy. Southern just hasn't produced at the position. It'd be one thing if you're battling it out and you have a couple of quarterbacks playing at the beginning. But this is 2 years in a row that Southern has ended the season with a quarterback they did not start the season with. And that's not because of injury. That would be one thing. You're not really going back and forth either. So they've been a consistent player at the position every single game until the last one. So when it was last year with McCray, he started all the way out. And then in comes Glennon McDaniel. Now, when you're looking at it this year, Harold Blood started every game this year. Eric Dooley gets fired and they say, you know what? We need to reevaluate who's playing at quarterback. The reason that's an indictment is because Eric Dooley is supposed to be an offensive genius. And I don't believe on kicking a man when he's down. I do not believe in that. However, we have to call a spade a spade. Last year in the SWAC championship, you quickly changed quarterbacks. And this year, when you're fired in the last game of the year, they say, you know what? This quarterback ain't cutting it. But frankly, I could have told you that from the previous 10 games that the quarterback wasn't cutting it. So why didn't Dooley decide we need to open it up and see if there's another option who could be better? Why, as soon as Dooley gets fired and they go into the next game, they say we need to open up a competition to see who's going to be our starting quarterback? Dooley is supposed to be an offensive mind. And with all respect to Coach Totten, he shouldn't have to become the offensive coordinator to make this change if Dooley was doing what he was supposed to do. Dooley is supposed to be an offensive mind. So as an offensive mind, you not making this has to go against you. And I understand that likely is not the reason he got fired. It wasn't like, man, you still starting Harold Blood. Let's get him out of here. But just because that's not the reason he got fired doesn't mean that we can't reflect on this being a poor decision-making trend. 2 years, he had a 2-year tenure. And you could argue that he didn't have the right quarterback in either one. You had a 2-year tenure, and you could argue that in both seasons, he didn't have good quarterback play. And we might be able to, give him a pass for that. But if you didn't have good quarterback play and you didn't have the right quarterback in, but you might have had the right quarterback on your roster, that falls on you. When Glendon McDaniel came in last year, everybody said finally. Right? I'm not in Baton Rouge. I'm not as tightly connected, right? I have more entities to cover than just the Jaguars. But when I see people who are close, I've seen people who are arguing, saying, why didn't you have McDaniel in the whole time? Who knows if that makes a difference? Of course, things are different when you come in. Who knows if Bodden being a starting quarterback all year would have made a difference? I don't know. When you look at his stat line, he had 231 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. It wasn't great. It was not great. But at the same time, maybe it was a different just catalyst. Maybe if you're having him playing the whole season, then maybe you're looking at a situation where your offense is better, right? Like sometimes you just don't have the right quarterback. When I look at Alabama State, I was texting Mason Smith, right? From Sports Illustrated, not anymore, but he was at Sports Illustrated. Now he's moved on to other things. But I was talking to him. He's an Alabama State graduate. And it was a situation where he was like, man, we got the guy. You didn't start off with that guy. And he's like, man, I wonder what would happen if we had him against FAMU or whatever. But they were going back and forth, right? Like you seen that Grambling a year ago was going back and forth. It's different. It's different than in Texas Southern. They started with Body got hurt. So it's different when you start the year with somebody and end the quarter or end the year with another quarterback. It's different depending on the circumstance. And for Southern, the circumstances where your coach just wasn't making good decisions. Your coach wasn't making the right call. Your coach had a struggling offense and a struggling quarterback and didn't look to other options until it was too late or until he was fired and somebody else came in and immediately looked at other options. They didn't go a game with Blood. They said, we need to open it up. And I heard there's more things on why Blood didn't get his spot, but it's not even about Blood retaining his spot. It's about as soon as Dooley got fired, they said, we need to look at other quarterback options. Doesn't look good. But I'll tell you what doesn't really look good. And that's Grambling losing the Bayou Classic for yet another year in a row. There's no turning point. It's just 3 specific times that they couldn't finish drives, and that's the reason that they lost that game. And we'll look at every single one of those as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today actually, we have the Vikings versus the Bears. And I have this feeling that it's going to be a really good game, a really close game. But do you think that they covered the spread? Now, that'll be something to look at. But we had a great weekend of action. We have bowl season upon us coming soon. You have the Celebration Bowl. You have the SWAC Championship. Try to find the lines on FanDuel.com/locked-on, and they'll have it all for you. College football, pro football, NBA, college basketball, everything in between. But it's on you. It's up to you to go to FanDuel.com/locked-on and take advantage of their big offers and opportunities, such as new customers getting $150 back in bonus bets when they win a money line bet of at least $5. So go to FanDuel.com/locked-on and take advantage of these and make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. And I really do appreciate it. Now, Grambling lost this game because they could not finish. Ironically, that's a great description of their last drive, but we'll get to that at the end of the show because Grambling lost this game because of an inability to finish, right? When you look at some of the stats, Grambling had 24 more plays. They had 115 more yards. They had 9 more minutes of time of possessions. You would hear these things and think, oh, Grambling won the game, but they didn't. And the reason they didn't is because they had drives that didn't result in anything, and drives that had a little bit of time on them, drives that had a little bit of length on them. And yet and still, they didn't win because they had a field goal attempt. It was blocked. That's the first of 3. When you look at Grambling, despite having more plays, having more yards, having more time of possession, they still lost this game because they weren't able to finish. They ran plays, got yards, and spent time on the field in drives that amounted to absolutely nothing. And the first one, probably the second most prominent one, was when they kicked the field goal that was blocked. And they had an opportunity to take this game from 14-7 to 14-10. But instead, when the kick was blocked, not only did they not get their 3 points, Southern returned it back for a touchdown. So the opportunity to make this 14-10, on that singular play, it ended up being 21-7. It's a 10-point swing. The next one that you want to look at, and this is when it really goes, a little bit deeper, because they were crawling their way out of a 20-point hole. The blocked field goal happened before that. But Southern scored a touchdown on their first drive. And then after that, they did absolutely nothing. They didn't get any yardage. They didn't score any points. Like, their offense just was cold from that point on. But Grambling could do nothing about it because Grambling drove down the field and got halted 2 of their last 3 possessions. Grambling was rolling, got down the field. But only on that second time did they score any points, and that was a touchdown. But let's look at the first one, right? Because you drive down the field and you get intercepted at the goal line. Happens to the best of us. But that was a situation where you're trying to climb out the hole, and you can't drive that far down and then give it up like that. It just doesn't work, okay? Like, you can't do that in a game of this magnitude and still expect to win. But you know what? You had another chance, and you score again. Boom, now you have another chance. You drive down the field. What happens when you drive down the field this time? It wasn't an interception, but you abandoned what got you there. From the time that Miles Crowley threw an interception, and I don't want to put this all on him because I think he's a good quarterback, but when the ball got in his hands, bad things happen at the end of the game. You throw an interception. From that point, they don't pass the ball again until the last play of the game. Literally. They run the ball with the running backs every single time they score a touchdown that way. They run the ball with the running back every single time they drive down the field to the 1-yard line. And then on 3rd and goal from the 1-yard line, really, you run the ball with Miles Crowley. The play after, you have Miles Crowley throw to a Lyndon Rash that clearly, it wasn't a good throw and it wasn't a high percentage pass. But most importantly, you abandon what you had. And okay, you're from the 4th and 3, got to score. Maybe running the ball isn't great in that situation, but that just wasn't a good play call if you are going to pass the ball. I didn't like it. But you have to second guess the decision to go away from what you've been doing. Miles Crowley threw an interception with about 10 minutes left in the game. Crowley threw that interception with 10 minutes left in the game. And from then on, they chose to never pass the ball again. And they chose to hand it off to the running backs every single time. Now, that has driven you down the field for a touchdown. That has driven you down the field to the 1-yard line. And on 3rd and goal from the 1, you decide to run it with Miles Crowley. To me, that was a chance to pound the rock with your running backs because both of them have helped you get down the field. But instead, Hugh Jackson got cute. Instead, Grambling decided to try to trick them and say, we're going to go with the quarterback this time. You lost 2 yards. Now you push yourself out of a position to be able to run the ball again, and you force yourself into passing, something you haven't done since 10 minutes in the 4th quarter. You pass the ball, interception. You run the ball for 10 minutes straight on 10 minutes straight on multiple drives. You get down there on the last play of the game. You throw the ball. It was a low percentage throw. It was a fade route that was poorly thrown to a receiver who was injured. This was nothing about this was really good. I didn't think the decision was good. I didn't think that the target was good due to health. And I didn't think that the throw was good. So yes, I'm second guessing. Yes, I'm questioning this decision because everything was working for you on the ground with your running backs. Why did you go away from them on third and goal in the first place? Why did you go away from them on third and goal in the first place to lead to your quarterback getting a 2-yard loss while trying to run? Overall, I just was not a fan of it. Thought that there could have been a much better call than it was. And to me, that call was running the ball on third down and running the ball on fourth down. They got you down here. Let's trust for them to be able to punch it in and win this game. But the fact that they couldn't finish, whether it was the kick, the field goal that got blocked, whether it was the drive down to the inside the 5-yard line that got intercepted, or if it was the play that got down or the drive that got down to the 1-yard line and they just weren't able to finish. Grambling's inability to finish is the reason they lost the 2023 Bayou Classic. Simple and plain. But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, kicking it with me. We'll be back tomorrow to look at Willie Simmons. Does he need, because I don't think that the SWAC champion or the SWAC superlative should be out by then, but does he need a SWAC championship in order to cement his coach of the year resume? We'll look at that on tomorrow's episode. But in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.